All right, we are on Genesis chapter 19, if I'm correct. And Kimmy is not here. I have a break after 22, between 22 and 23. Would someone like to volunteer to do the reading today?
I can read.
Go ahead, Angie. Go ahead.
I was going to say, okay. Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we will spend the night in the square. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have two daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. Get out of the way, they replied. And they said, this fellow came here as an alien, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness so that they could not find the door. The two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons in laws, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons in laws who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons in laws thought he was joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away where the city is punished. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and his two daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. For the mountains are for flee the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, no, my lords, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it's small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. He said to them, very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly because I cannot do anything until you reach it. That is why the town was called Zor. Stop there.
Yes, Zor means little. I have a little side note there. Wow, any thoughts on this? I thought when he
Well, we kind of
I thought when he escaped, he went to the mountains, and that's why he ended up with his daughter. But
we talked about this before in the sense that why would you give your daughters over?
That's what I was going to
to
say.
do with whatever you wish, and them
Yeah,
saying, "Well, we'll do worse to you than we're going to do to them." Like
yeah.
how violent and disgusting were the acts, and every man, young and old, were involved in this. I don't
Yeah.
think they were born that way.
I
What
had
kind
a
of a
little thing.
parent does that?
I had a little thing in my footnote, and it says, "How could any father give his daughters to be ravished by a mob of perverts just to protect two strangers? Possibly Lot was scheming to save both the girls and the visitors, hoping the girls' fiancés would rescue them, or that the homosexual men would be disinterested in the girls and simply go away. Although it was a custom of the day to protect guests at any cost, this terrible suggestion reveals how deeply sin had been absorbed into Lot's life. He had become hardened to evil acts in the evil city. Whatever Lot's motives were, we see here an illustration of Sodom's terrible wickedness, a wickedness so great that God had to destroy the entire city." But I'm like, ugh, yeah, that always gets me with offering the girls. Now, question for you. When they said in 11, well, 10, but the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back in the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness. So is it the angels?
Hmm.
Okay, that struck the perverts.
Yes.
Okay.
So Jesus incarnate was with them at Abraham's house. Then he assigned the two angels to go and assess what was happening at Sodom, even though they already knew, and to do the judgment.
Okay.
So I wonder if everyone outside the door was blind because they managed to get out without someone. And I can't imagine the urgency in his voice that his son-in-laws would think that he was joking. Any other thoughts? If not, Cindy? Whenever you're ready with John MacArthur. You're muted, Cindy.
Sorry.
There you go.
Verse 1, two angels. These were the angels who, with God, had visited Abraham. They had taken human form, and that's in verse 10. They were called men. Lot was sitting in the gate. Since city officials and other prominent citizens conducted the community's affairs at the gate, Lot participated there as a judge. Verse 2, please turn into your servant's house. Lot's invitation to the two angels to partake of his hospitality was most likely not just courtesy, but an effort to protect them from the known perversity of the Sodomites. Verse 3, he insisted strongly. Such was Lot's concern for these strangers that their stated preference to pass the night in the town square could not be permitted. Verse 4, the men of the city, all the people. Both the size of the lustful mob of men boisterously milling around Lot's house and the widespread nature of Sodom's immoral perversion received emphasis both from the additional qualifiers used, quotes, all the people from every quarter, and quotes, both old and new.
I was just thinking, like, that would have been horrible if all of those men were there and they all intended to rape them. They wouldn't have survived that. Didn't we have one where that happened to the woman?
Mm-hmm.
Where that had happened?
Even acknowledging legitimate exaggeration in this use of all would not detract from this emphasis This was indeed a wicked city. Verse 5, know them carnally. They sought homosexual relations with the visitors. God's attitude toward this vile behavior became clear when he destroyed the city. And there are several references, Leviticus, Romans, 1 Corinthians, 1 Timothy, where all homosexual behavior is prohibited and condemned by God.
Could you give me those verses again?
Yes, Leviticus 18, verse 22
Thank you.
and 29. Leviticus 20, verse 13. Romans 1, verse 26. First Corinthians 6, verse 9. 1 Timothy 1, verse 10.
Thank you.
Verses 6 to 8. Lot's response betrayed tension in his ethics. His offer to gratify their sexual lust contradicted his plea not to act so wickedly. Such contradiction made clear also the vexation of the spirit under which he lived in wicked Sodom. Verse 8, do to them as you wish. The constraints of Eastern hospitality and the very purpose for which Lot had invited the visitors in compelled Lot to offer his daughters for a less deviant kind of wickedness, so as to protect his guests. This foolish effort shows that while Lot was right with God, he had contented himself with some sins and weak faith rather than leaving Sodom. But God was gracious to him because he was righteous by faith before God. Verse 9 keeps acting as a judge. Their accusation suggests Lot had made moral pronouncements before, but his evaluation was no longer tolerable. Pressed hard. Homosexual deviation carries an uncontrollable lust that defies restraint. Even when blinded, they try to fulfill their lust. And they're referring to verse 11. Okay. 10 and 11. Lot was now being protected by those whom he had earlier sought to protect. Verse 13. The Lord has sent us to destroy it. With the wickedness of the city so graphically confirmed, divine judgment was the only outcome. But Lot's family could escape it. Verse 14 seemed to be joking. Lot's warning of imminent judgment fell within the category of jesting. So concluded his sons-in-law, or perhaps his daughter's fiance. Verse 16, the Lord being merciful to him. This reason, elsewhere described as God having remembered Abraham, is why, in the face of Lot's seeming reluctance to leave, quotes lingered, the angels personally and forcefully escorted him and his family beyond the city's precincts. 17 to 21. An urbanized lifestyle was apparently superior to a lonely one in the mountains, and might be, by Lot, playing upon the mercy already shown him, negotiated for an alternative escape destination, another city. The angel's reply indicated that this city was included in the original judgment plan, but would be spared for Lot's sake.
Oh, I didn't get that. So Zor was included in the original judgment.
That's what it's saying here, yes. So I'm wondering, were there
Oh.
other surrounding towns? I don't know.
Yeah, it says 20 in 21. I grant you this favor also that I will not overthrow this city of which you have spoken. So he was planning on judging that. I had never picked that up before.
I didn't either. That's it for John.
I have concern for the children in this city. They were just so perverse.
Well, since they were all homosexuals, how many kids do you think there were, other than Lot's
To
daughter?
me, like they went after everything. I mean, because he's offering his daughters, maybe in his mind he knew they wouldn't take her and he was stalling for time. I don't
That's what I think.
Well, back in the day, now this is the Greek culture. They had wives, but their sole purpose was to reproduce. And at age 5, the boys, they were with their mother through age 5. And then they went to these academies, so to speak. And it was homosexual behavior. I mean, that was widely accepted way back when.
And you said that was in the Greeks.
Yeah, I had to do a course on Greek studies. So that just reminded me of it, you know?
I think the Romans did that too, except it was like when they were 15 or 16. The
Yeah,
parents
they
took their
were a
boys.
little bit older, right?
Can you imagine being a parent and thinking this was normal? I mean, it just goes to show you how like crowdsourcing an idea.
And those kids didn't have a chance.
Mm-mm.
I can't imagine either that God's pulling me out of this judgment that's coming and how bad it was, and I'm sitting there negotiating where he's going to take me.
Yeah.
Like I can it just doesn't like it doesn't seem like normal behavior.
And it sounded like reading it that, well, it does say it indicates Lot was very influenced. And I'm just, and that he was weak, but yet he was considered righteous. But I don't know, was he engaging in homosexual activity? I don't know.
Well, and my other thought too was like if Abraham had not bartered with God about saving Lot and his family, would Lot have been saved? Because even though he said he was a man of faith, or who had faith, it seemed to me like God was going to take out that entire place. And Abraham interceded for him and his family.
Well, what does happen to Lot after this?
Oh, it gets interesting.
Oh, okay.
There's some people groups that come out of this that you'll find very interesting.
Okay.
Kathy, whenever you're ready.
Okay. This chapter records the sad consequences of Lot's spiritual decline. Then Lot passes off the scene while Abraham's story continues. Abraham was the friend of God, but Lot was the friend of the world, and contrast between these two men are easy to see. He has quite a bit on verse 1. He has it split up into some sections. Locations. When the heavenly contingent came to visit Abraham, he was at his tent door, but Lot was sitting in the gate of the wicked city. Abraham was a pilgrim and a stranger, only passing through this world, but Lot had gradually abandoned his tent and settled down in Sodom. Instead of keeping his eyes on the heavenly city, Lot looked towards Sodom and began to walk by sight. Then he moved his tent near Sodom and finally moved into Sodom. Lot's location in the gate indicates that he was a man of some authority, for that was where official business was conducted. Had Lot gone to Sodom because God directed him, his being there would have fulfilled divine purposes. After all, God put Joseph in Egypt, Daniel in Babylon, and Esther in Persia, and their presence turned out to be a blessing. Worldliness is not a matter of physical geography, but of heart attitude. Lot's heart was in Sodom long before his body arrived there. No doubt he got his first love for the world when he went to Egypt with Abraham, and he never overcame it. Times. It was early afternoon when the Lord and his angels visited Abraham, but it was evening when the angels entered Sodom. Abraham was walking in the light, while Lot was walking in darkness. Visitors. Only the two angels visited Lot, for the Lord could not fellowship with Lot and his family as he did with Abraham and Sarah. Even though Lot was a believer, his life was such that the Lord did not feel at home with him. It is the separated believer who enjoys the close walk in communion with the Lord. Let me read that. It is the separated believer who enjoys the close walk and communion with the Lord. Greek scholar Kenneth Wuest translated Paul's prayer in Ephesians 3:17 that the Christ might finally settle down and feel completely at home in your hearts through your faith. Unlike Abraham, Lot had no tent or altar, and the Lord could not fellowship with him. Verses 2 to 11, hospitality. Lot called himself a servant, but you do not see him hastening to prepare a meal as Abraham did, nor did he stand by to see what further service he could render. But the arrival of the men at the city at the door for immoral purposes was the climax of the evening. Bring them out to us so we can have sex with them, is the NIV translation of verse 5. Lot was willing to sacrifice his two unmarried daughters to the lust of the crowd, but the angels intervened. What had happened to Lot's personal values that he would offer his daughters to satisfy the sexual appetites of the mob? In contrast, Abraham would offer his son to the Lord. Messages. God's message to Abraham was a joyful one. He and Sarah would have the promised son within a year, but the message to Lot was frightening. God was going to destroy Sodom and everything in it. God would have spared the city had the angels found 10 believers, but since that was not possible, God mercifully rescued the believers they did find. God's message to the lost world is that judgment is coming, but his promise to his own people is that he will rescue them. Influence, verse 14. Because of his faith and obedience, Abraham was a blessing to his home and to the whole world. Because of his worldliness, Lot had no spiritual influence either in the city or in his own home. His married daughters and their husbands laughed at him and refused to leave the city. Even his wife was so in love with Sodom that she had to take one last look, and that look killed her. Lot's two unmarried daughters accompanied him out of the city, but they ended up in a cave, getting their father drunk and committing incest with him. After separating from Abraham, Lot had allowed his character to deteriorate and his influence declined with it. Attitudes. This actually covers verses 15 to 26. The first time God rescued Lot, he was a prisoner of war, and he went right back to Sodom. That painful experience should have warned him that he was out of will with God. But if Lot heard the warning, he certainly did not heed it. Now God has to take Lot by the hand and forcibly drag him out of Sodom. First, Lot lingered, then he argued, then he begged to be allowed to go his own way. Instead of being grateful for God's mercy and obeying his rescuers, Lot resisted them and created trouble for them. In contrast, Abraham obeyed God's will, even to the point of offering up his own son. That's it.
19, 1 through 5, Tony Evans. The text shifts from Abraham's conversation to the angel's journey into Sodom. Immediately, we see a contrast in hospitality that these angels are offered. Yes, Lot prepared a feast. Lot prepared a feast and baked unleavened bread for them. I didn't see that. Do you guys see that? Oh, there it is.
Yeah, it's in verse 3.
Okay. But it was not long before the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, began pounding on Lot's door, demanding to release the men so they could have sex with them. The outcry against Sodom, it seems, took only a few hours to prove its claims. Sodom had descended into such a den of sin that visitors to the city would not be left in public alone for even a few hours without the fear of being raped. 6 through 8. Initially, we might view Lot sympathetically. After all, he saw two men in danger and brought them in. He took a great risk in doing so. What he does next, however, shows how much of Sodom's wicked culture he had absorbed. In his attempt to protect the angelic guests, Lot offered to give the lustful, riotous crowd his two daughters that they could be raped instead. We are and should be repulsed by such an offer, which reveals Lot's moral ties to Sodom, as well as his failure to believe that God would protect him. This contrast becomes all the more plain once the angels themselves strike the crowd with blindness, thankfully preventing Lot from following through on his disgusting plan. Another thought I had about these girls, if they're being raised in this city where it's this rampant disgusting behavior, how did they ever remain virgins? Like, I think there's more to this story that we're not getting. 9 through 14. With the mob beating down Lot's door, the angels decided to reveal God's plan to Lot. We are about to destroy this place, they warned. If you have someone else here, anyone you want to rescue, now is the time to get them out. Lot tried, but was met with confusion and laughter from his daughter's husbands-to-be when he extended the invitation for them to leave town with him. There is no more dangerous place to be than hearing the warnings of God and shrugging them off as if they were a joke. I guess too, though, like I gotta wonder, like, were the sons-in-laws involved in the behavior? Because if, like what Cindy said, where they married just to have children, the men could have very possibly not even been interested in the women at all and only marrying them for the sake of having children. That would explain why they were still virgins, if that were the case. My next section starts at 15 and then goes all the way through 29. So do we want to read that first?
I kind of have a question there. Do you think whenever these two angels arrived in Sodom, do you think that Lot knew they were angels? Or you know how you hear now, like when we entertain strangers now, we could entertain angels and we don't even know it. So I was kind of looking at that, and I don't know that, like, did he specifically
I don't
know
think
they're
he
angels?
did.
And if he did, what if he did? Why did he act the way he did?
I don't think he did because in, like, what is it, verse 2 there? Yeah, verse 2. He says, my lords, but it's all lowercase. Like, he was honoring them as guests, but maybe not. And I think it's interesting too, because Lot must have had a position in the city that was higher up for him to be sitting at the gates. Because the people who sat at the gates were like the judges and the business people. You know what I mean? Like, for him to be just standing there.
That's what my concordance says. Lot held an important position in the government or associated with those who did because the angels found him at the city's entrance. Perhaps Lot's status in Sodom was one reason he was so reluctant to leave.
Mm. Good point. I'm going to read that next section, 23 through 29. Does that work for Worsby and John MacArthur? The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. He overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Cindy, do you want to read John?
Verse 24. Brimstone from the Lord out of the heavens. When morning came, judgment fell. Any natural explanation about how the Lord used combustible sulfur deposits to destroy that locale falters on this emphatic indication of miraculous judgment. Brimstone could refer to any inflammable substance, perhaps a volcanic eruption and an earthquake with a violent electrical storm overthrew the area. That area is now believed to be under the south end of the Dead Sea. Quiet. Burning gases, sulfur, and magma blown into the air all fell to bury the region. Verse 26. His wife looked back. Lot's wife paid the price of disregarding the angelic warning to flee without a backward glance.
Did you
In
say,
so doing,
sorry, I thought you were done there. Did you say that it's believed to be at the south end of the Dead Sea?
yes,
Thank you.
in so doing, she became not only encased in salt, but a poignant example of disobedience, producing unwanted reaction at Judgment Day. Even as her home cities became bywords of God's judgment on sin. Verse 29, the cities of the plain. The best archaeological evidence locates Sodom and Gomorrah at the south of the Dead Sea region, in the area south of the Lycus Peninsula that juts out on the east.
Okay, say that again. It's at the south end, to be under the south end of the Dead Sea at the
And the area is south of the Lysan, Lisan,
Lisan Peninsula.
Peninsula that juts out on the east. That's it through 29.
Kathy, can you do Worsby and be able to stop at 29?
Actually, he takes 27 through 38. He finishes out the chapter.
Okay, I'll do through 29 and then we'll stop there and finish that tomorrow. The potential sons-in-laws refused to leave Sodom because they didn't believe God's wrath was real. But even Lot, the reason for this rescue mission, hesitated to leave when the time came. The angels had to drag him, his wife, and his daughters out of the city by hand because they were all too attracted to it. They had become comfortable in a society that rejected God and his laws. Lot's wife showed the most hesitance and received the due punishment for it, even though the angels strictly warned them, do not look back and do not stop anywhere on the plain. Lot's wife paused and looked back and instantly became a pillar of salt. She thus became a permanent monument of the consequences of disobedience and worldliness. Only because of God's promise to Abraham were Lot and his two daughters, a mere 3 people out of an entire city, saved from destruction. The story of Sodom's destruction, while it clearly shows God's judgment against homosexuality, offers a much larger warning. In Luke 17:32, Jesus charged us to remember not the evil men of Sodom, but Lot's wife, because our chief temptation is to become too attracted to this world. Jesus teaches us to be in the world, working for the good of our neighbors, but not attached to the world in sinful ways, contaminated by its rebellion against God. I was thinking about the Dead Sea because I've been there. And the mineral content in the air, like you can't get sunburnt there because there's so much mineral content in between you and the sun. And you can't swim in the Dead Sea because the mineral content's like 30 some percent. Like if you get some of that in your mouth, it burns. So then I was thinking, like, if she were south of the Dead Sea and she paused and hesitated, she could have, I mean, like, not just because she turned around, but just that hesitation. Like, if it were a earthquake or a volcano, like the fact that she did that, that mineral content could have captured her and turned her into the pillar of salt, which I just now thought about, Cindy, as you were reading what John said about where it was located. Any other thoughts?
So are you saying then that even the atmosphere around the Dead Sea is
Mineral content is really, really high.
so like as in like it would be almost toxic to your
No, like you can go and you can get in the water. You just like it's just so it's really, really healthy actually. When you go there, like it's really, really good for your skin. It'd be like if you're going to take a mineral bath down in Berkeley Springs. Like the mineral content's really, really high. But like when you're there, like on the edges of the Dead Sea. Like nothing living can live in the Dead Sea. There's no fish or anything like that in there because it's too high. You can see the salt build up around there. So my thought is like the mineral content in the air, like if you're there, you don't have to wear sunscreen because there's so much mineral content between you and the sun that you don't burn.
okay.
So if there were this environmental explosion of whatever, extreme heat from a volcano or whatever, it could be why she turned into a pillar of salt when she hesitated and turned around. She could have been she did sign her own death penalty, but like that would make sense to me why she would have turned into a pillar of salt. But for the love of God, like he saved her multiple times and she still was going to go back. Desiring the things of
She
Sodom.
loved her life.
Yeah, like who would want to live in that disgustingness of people?
My concordance says about this, 1926, Lot's wife turned back to look at the smoldering city of Sodom, clinging to the past. She was unwilling to turn completely away. Are you looking back lovingly at sin while trying to make a move forward with God? You can't make progress with God as long as you are holding on to pieces of your old life. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 6:21 or 6:24, no one can serve two masters.
Well, even when you look at like, let's take, for example, Hollywood. You know, people obviously love that life. They just, as corrupt as it is and that we see it, they just stay there. They just keep staying there or going back.
I think they give themselves up a little piece at a time. And then they find themselves in a position like, okay, I'm just thinking like what I would be like. If I gave myself up a little piece at a time, I would finally get to a position where I'm so deep in the hole, I'm not going to get out. So what the heck? I'm not even going to try.
And then sometimes you just get sucked into it to where you can't get out without maybe fear of your life per se, with some instances.
Or being exposed for the nasty things you got caught up into.
Yeah. So therefore, rather than have that come out and have people know that about you, you're going to stay in that because of being an embarrassment or like, well, I don't want anybody to know that I did that.
Yeah, I think it takes like bravery for people to, I think it's really brave of people when they like free themselves by sharing things. Politicians should do that. They should just write books about everything they did, put it out there so everybody knows, and then they don't have to be blackmailed and
P. Diddy is the classic example today.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Which he's probably gonna get off because he's too connected to too many people. He's just the scapegoat. Just like Epstein is the scapegoat. Any other thoughts? Okay, if not, we're going to do our trivia. Everybody unmute. Gretchen, you playing? Okay. Not sure if Sue's there or not, but Sue, if you're playing, she's blacked out. I'm going to assume she had to do something. All right, you ready? Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Who were Lazarus' two sisters?
Martha,
Mary.
And Mary.
You guys are so good. Yes, Martha and Mary. John 11, 1 through 3 is where you can read about that if you would like. This concludes the reading of God's word for today.
for sure it's for certain.
Till tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll pick up with Kathy backtracking a little bit. We'll read 30 through 38, and then Kathy will backtrack and read her section, and then Cindy, and then I will read Tony to get us through chapter 19. Have a great day, ladies.
You too.